We're now going to talk about economic issues. We have a terrific panel to join us to talk about this. We've got Rostyslav Shurma, who is the Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, who's going to be talking to us about what Ukraine can offer the world. We have Niall Ferguson, who is the esteemed economic historian, been in America for many years, now moving to the UK, or moved to the UK already. And he'll be offering a global perspective of how to look at Ukraine's economic future and other parallels that we can see from elsewhere in the world. And then last but not least, we have Larry Fink, the CEO and founder of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, who has been involved in creating and backing pro bono a recovery fund for Ukraine for the future. Do we have Larry Fink on the stage yet, or on the online yet? Okay, in a couple of minutes he will join. So, all right, fantastic. Larry, good morning. All right, Larry, I can't quite see you, but can you hear me, Larry? Do you want to do a thumbs up if you can hear me? Can you hear me? Yep. Great. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, fantastic. Where are you talking from? Are you in New York right now?
I just arrived back from New York from a business trip, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I'm going to actually start with you because I think that some people in the room may not be aware of what BlackRock is doing in relation to Ukraine. You obviously have a very large footprint in Western financial markets. I think that, Ukraine has not featured particularly on the BlackRock radar before, but you have given a very clear indication of your support for Ukraine. And in fact, in Davos this year, you declared that you saw Ukraine not merely as a test case for democracy, but a test case for capitalism as well. Can you explain to us what exactly you're doing and why you think that Ukraine is going to be a test case for capitalism in the future?
Well, it's an honor to be part of this panel and to be working alongside with Victor. I want to thank everybody. Importantly, I think the outcome of Ukraine is very important for democracy, very important for the role of capitalism in the world. There's a great opportunity after the cessation of hostilities to rebuild Ukraine to be a strong capitalistic democracy where investors worldwide will be seeking opportunities to invest in Ukraine, to rebuild Ukraine, but to ensure for Ukrainians and for investors that everything is done in a fair and just way. And it's very important in BlackRock's role right now as we are trying to set up the Ukrainian Development Fund for reconstruction, is to making sure that we can attract public capital, we can attract private capital, and there's going to be a great need for both, to find opportunities to rebuild Ukraine, to make Ukraine a strong, vibrant economy again. And it's going to be necessary to attract that type of capital. And in our conversations with asset owners worldwide, from Asia to the Gulf region to throughout Europe and North America, more of our clients are asking us, what do we believe will be the opportunities to help Ukraine rebuild itself, to ensure that Ukraine is a strong, vibrant country, that it has the ability to protect itself again and build itself, and that it can go from strength to strength. The natural resources in Ukraine, the bread box and food opportunities in Ukraine are there. Obviously, there's a great need for huge sums of money for the rebuilding. But what I told the Ukrainian leadership, the world must feel that in investing in Ukraine, that it is fair and just. that we're not creating a country full of elitists and oligarchs, but we're creating a country in which families can enjoy a bright and prosperous future, investing in Ukraine for the long term for the world's pension funds can be seen as an opportunity to earn a fair and just return, at the same time rebuilding a vibrant country to its full potential. And this is what we are doing, working alongside the leadership team of Ukraine, the team around the economy, to making sure that we're building the proper structure in which that we have a process in which we can invest fairly and just. We have more certainty of how that money can be spent, where it will be spent, and that we are rebuilding the economy for all Ukrainians, right, not a few Ukrainians. And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. So you did indeed say very strongly in Davos, so you emphasize the point that you were not trying to just create an economy that worked for oligarchs, but an economy that works for everyone. Before I ask you about the wider significance of Ukraine in the global economy, in terms of attracting foreign investors like yourself to Ukraine, if peace comes, or rather when peace comes, what exactly...
Hopefully when.
Hopefully soon, yes. What exactly do you need to see right now that you do not have at the moment? Is it changes in law to say, let foreign investors invest or buy directly Ukrainian assets? Is it de-risking on the part of foreign investors, finding ways to deal with currency risk or political risk? What exactly is missing at the moment that when you talk to your clients, you would like to see to tempt them to come in scale? Because you said previously, there's going to be need for $700 billion or whatever, even more potentially. So we're talking very big numbers which need to be mobilized from the global capital markets in the future.
Well, let's be clear, investors worldwide have choice. They are seeking fair and just returns where they're going to be able to return and build the financial futures of their participants. I mean, the majority of the money that BlackRock manages is on behalf of retirees, and people are building for retirement. And so we have to ensure that we have, wherever we invest, that we have high probabilities of returning the capital that we're investing in, and we're receiving the just returns over time. So in every jurisdiction, the most important foundation beyond peace and security is having an enduring judicial system and a transparent legal framework. That we have that foundation of understanding of what it is a framework, what is the legal framework to invest in, and that as we invest, we have strong beliefs that we're going to receive those returns that warrant the risk that is being taken. And importantly, to receive all the, I would say, the public monies, the subordinated capital that the public monies are going to be providing, they are going to have to feel that their money is being placed and it's secure too, that we're not rewarding just a few, but we're building a structure in which we're rewarding the entirety of Ukraine. No one wants to see their money being put to work and that there's only a few winners in that. The whole concept and what we agreed when we took on the assignment to work with the Ukrainian government is making sure that we create a structure in place where we could have higher confidence that we're going to be investing around a strong, transparent legal framework, that we have the proper checks and balances, that where the money is going is truly going to those needs, that we have proper understanding of how we are going to build this out, and importantly, that we're going to be working with all the supply chains and making sure this works out properly. This is a big endeavor. If money believes that the pathway of investing becomes cluttered with bad behaviors, then money will not be seeking those type of investments. And so the most important thing is making sure we have transparent legal framework and that we feel comfortable how to invest, that we have proper checks and balances and making sure where the money is going to be investing in, it actually does invest there, that we're not building around a corrupted system, but a system of fairness.
Right. Well, we're going to be hearing from Rostyslav Shurma a bit in a moment about how Ukraine is trying to deal with these issues. But quickly, before I turn to Rostyslav Shurma, I'd like to ask you, how much of a drag is the war on the global economy at the moment? I ask that because Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, said previously that she regards the task of creating peace in Ukraine as one of the most important issues for the wider global economy in terms of its impact on global food prices, energy, and inflation. In your view, how significant is the Ukrainian conflict on the wider global economy and financial markets that you look at?
Well, I use a framework of fear, and I would say the fear index is higher today than we've seen in years and years and years. A lot of that fear is because of the fear of climate risk and the fear of the transition. We have many geopolitical issues, and Ukraine is just one of them where we have greater and greater fear. Fear to me is one of the big components of why people have lower birth rates, why people save more money and consume less, but they don't invest. And so I think Ukraine is a major component of that elevated fear that we're seeing in the world. And it shows up, as Secretary Yellen said, related to food insecurity and food prices. It shows up, obviously it showed up in Europe because of the impact of the invasion, the elevated prices in gas and oil. And we now have conversations throughout the globe about energy security. We have conversations now about food security. All these issues are a major component of why there's elevated fear in the world today. And to me, our role and a safe and a democratized Ukraine can elevate hope. And to me, that's what we need a little more of in this world right now. More justifiable hope and less fear. And the sooner we have a cessation of the war in Ukraine, I would say it will create more elevated hope. And that's to me, one of the foundations of having a strong, vibrant world.
Absolutely. Well, hope is central to animal spirits. So,
Yes.
and on that issue of providing hope, I'm going to turn now to Mr. Shurma and ask you, you have argued that revitalizing Ukraine with the help of groups like BlackRock will unleash a number of assets which can be used more widely in the world. Tell us exactly what you think Ukraine has to offer, not just the investors in BlackRock and other funds, but more widely the global economy today.
Good afternoon to everybody. Ukraine has a number of, I would say, definite natural advantages where we have the real competitive advantage to any other country. Obviously, the market will always decide itself what to do, where to invest, and what to develop, but our deep analysis shows that at least there are 5 to 7 segments where Ukraine is the very good natural place to develop and to focus on. The first segment, the most obvious to start, is perhaps the energy, the new energy, because traditionally the European energy map was very linked to Russia, to natural gas, to coal, to oil, and all of that is being phased out. Moreover, we have the green transition, the electrification of mobility, electrification of heating. It means that there'll be the need for the thousands of terawatts hour of clean electricity. And what is clean electricity? This is about the wind, about the solar. And ultimately, this is to natural conditions, availability of land and availability of onshore and offshore wind. And if you look at the map of the Europe, you will just not find not enough of that natural resource. And Ukraine might be this perfect fit to supply not only the electricity, because the potential of the onshore wind is more than 320 gigawatts and 250 of offshore wind in Ukraine. The hundreds of thousands of square kilometers for the solar, and the very good basic infrastructure. And this is not only about electricity, this is about all energy-intensive products like hydrogen, like green steel, like green ammonia, and many, many others. So this is one of the very good natural offers that Ukraine has. The number one will be about everything which is about the agri. So everybody knows us as a bread basket, but there is a huge potential and huge business opportunities of downward and forward integration. What does it mean? If you look now at the sourcing of the resources for the agriculture, you will see that for our 150 million market of all the crops, 70% of being imported of all the resources. And this market is big enough to install seed protection, crop protection, seeds factories, fertilizers factories, and others. And the same, if you go afterwards, you'll get the multi-billion opportunities for food processing. And another sub-segment, which is even much bigger than the first and the second in agri, is about the green technologies in agri, like the biogas. Only the existing level of production is about the potential of 1,000 billion of cubic meters of biogas, which is quite needed now in Europe. Number three is a lot of industries around the critical minerals. Let's take lithium, which is the fuel of the future. Number second, deposits in the world, in the Europe. And this is really important in terms of reshoring of all these industries to the continent, back from China and from Southeast Asia. If you take steel, the biggest deposits of iron ore on the continent and the biggest production of iron ore on the continent existing. And with the gradual transition to the green steel, Ukraine seems to be the most perfect location to locate the new facilities for the green steel, because green steel produced in Ukraine will be the cheapest possible green steel that can be supplied to Europe. So the production of green steel in any European country will have the cost of at least 10, maybe 15, 20% higher than in Ukraine potentially. And we can go segment by segment, but in total this is up to 10 industries. Another one is the IT. So everybody knows, understands the IT potential for the Ukraine, the mathematical, the engineering potential of our people. But what is really important and what potential is really is not unrecovered, this is the entrepreneurial IT potential. Because what we are doing as an IT country is the outsourcing. 90% of the IT business in Ukraine was offering the outsourced services to the global companies, which is quite low value added. But the product companies, the development companies, they were not in Ukraine. Why not? Because there was no proper ecosystem to fund these startups. And if you sum up the entrepreneurial potential and mathematical engineering potential of our people, young people, you will get the perfect place for the new Silicon Valley of the Europe. So, and as well, there are other segments that Ukraine can offer to the global business community, but let's ask ourselves, what should be done? And Laurie just answered, the number one is security. Security of the investments, physical security. This is the top question, and this is not only about the ceasing of the hostilities, this is about the long-term security guarantees. Because obviously, theoretically, there can't be the way, we find easy the way to stop the hostilities, the physical, the fire. But what is the guarantee that it will not repeat in the year 3, 5, 10? So this is about the long-term model that will guarantee the security in Ukraine for decades. Yeah.
Right, well thank you. That's a very impressive list. In fact, in some ways, the vision you sketch out is one of something a bit like Startup Nation, to cite Israel, which of course is another place that's built an extraordinary IT sector on the back of a lot of defense spending, coupled with the breadbasket, coupled with this extraordinary potential supply of not just lithium, but a whole range of rare earth minerals, which could also potentially help US and Europe wean off their dependency from China and start sourcing more of these from Ukraine in the future. It's a very interesting potential vision. Neil, does it have any chance, Professor Ferguson, sorry, give you your full title, does it have any chance of being realised?
Well, now that you're, is it Master of King's College, Cambridge?
Provost.
I should address you as Provost. Before I answer that important question, I need to issue a correction. It's not true that I'm moving back to the UK. I'm on sabbatical leave from the Hoover Institution for a year. And the reason I say that is that last night I was in London. The reason I'm late arriving here is that I was in London with Condi Rice, H.R. McMaster, Steve Kotkin, a group of other Hoover people. We had an intensive one-day conference discussing the kind of issues that we're discussing here. And I had the privilege of dining with the Prime Minister along with Secretary Rice. And as I listened to President Bush there, I was thinking just how valuable it is that the Hoover Institution can provide the kind of expertise that it has, even although it's 5,000 miles away. And I'm going to come back to one particular part of that in a minute, and it's the point Rostyslav made about Ukraine's technology future, which I think is a hugely important point. Everyone talks about artificial intelligence today, especially people who don't know about it. It's impressive how many instant experts there are. But one of the most impressive innovators in AI that I've met in the last 5 years is a Ukrainian, a young man named Oleg Roginsky. Some of you will know him well, who's been based in California for some years. And his People AI company is an example of what you're talking about. Ukraine has the talent as well as the natural resources. I want to make 3 points in answer to the question, is supporting Ukraine the best you can do for the global economy? The first is in answer to the increasing number of Republicans to the right in the United States who would say it's a waste of money. And we hear more and more this argument being made. In fact, it's the best value for money you could probably find in national security today. What is really impressive about the war in Ukraine is that compared with, for example, the wars that George W. Bush fought, this is an extraordinarily efficient, well-run war with a very decent prospect of success. True, miracles have not happened this summer, but I don't think anybody who understood the nature of the war this year expected a miracle. What we have seen has been successful gains and meaningful attrition of a Russian invasion force that, let's not forget, was struck by a mutiny just over 2 months ago. Generally, that's not a sign of imminent victory when there's a mutiny in your ranks. So, point one, this is a value for money war, not just from the point of view of the Ukrainian people, who of course want their freedom and their democracy and will pay the ultimate price for that, but it's a value for money war for the West, for the free world, for those of us who share the Ukrainian commitment to freedom and to democracy, to national independence, to the rule of law. Second point I want to make. We cannot afford to lose this war. Because if we lose this war, if 2 years from now our attention span has once again wavered, and 2 years from now it is in fact the Russian offensive that is being reported on the BBC or in the Financial Times, that will not just be a tragedy for the Ukrainian people. That will be a disaster for the security of the whole of Europe, and not just Europe. Just as Putin inferred from Afghanistan that the United States was weak, Xi Jinping will infer from failure in Ukraine that the United States is weak. And if he draws that inference, the probability of a conflict on a much larger scale in the Indo-Pacific over most likely Taiwan will soar. So it is without question the right thing to do to support Ukraine, because Ukraine's defeat implies massive costs that the United States and its allies are in no fit state to bear. The cost of a new Cold War, the cost, for example, of matching China's massive naval buildup, the cost of being able to defend and perhaps retake Taiwan is a truly daunting one, a far, far higher cost than the cost of supporting Ukraine today. And if you look at the latest numbers out of US fiscal policy, and readers of your newspaper, Gillian, will have seen them, as well as readers of your rival, the Wall Street Journal, we have a deficit in the United States that turns out to be twice the size we thought it would be in May. Not 4% of gross domestic product, 8%. This is a massive fiscal disaster when the US economy is running hot at full employment. I have said many times in my career, when a great power is spending more on debt service than on defense, it has a problem. Guess what? That is now the case in the United States, with effect from the second quarter of this year, defense and debt service are accounting for the same share of budgetary resources. And it will get worse because the higher interest rates on a very large stock of debt with accumulating deficits, that adds up to some very nasty fiscal arithmetic. So we actually can't afford to lose. Because if we lose in Ukraine, we'll have to fight a larger war in Asia that I don't think we're in a fit state to do. Final point. You know, I've heard analogies with Israel. And I think, Rostislav, you implied an analogy with Brazil just then, because in some ways I can kind of imagine Ukraine as Brazil. But the analogy I think I prefer is with South Korea. South Korea was almost destroyed in the Korean War in the 1950s. In 1953, it was a far poorer country than Ukraine. Today, it was a far poorer country than many African countries in 1953. Nor did it achieve the kind of glorious peace, a victorious peace, that many people dream of in Ukraine today. It had to settle for an armistice, as President Bush mentioned. It had to accept an inconclusive division of the Korean peninsula, a demilitarized zone, and a permanent military threat. That could be Ukraine's fate. Let's not kid ourselves. But remember, despite all that, South Korea probably has been the most successful economy of the last half century. And that should be the example Ukrainians pay the closest attention to.
Well, thank you, Neil. That was very powerful, very thought-provoking. Larry has to leave in just a moment, so I'm going to ask him to comment or react to that vision, and then turn to Rostislav and ask him to comment as well. But Larry, before you go, do you look at Ukraine as a potential future Israel or South Korea or Brazil? What out of all the 7 sectors that Rostislav sketched out as the strengths of Ukraine for the world going forward do you find the most attractive? What would you tell your clients to get excited about?
I like Neil's reference to South Korea. Obviously, the destruction of South Korea from its war with North Korea are very symbolic to what's happening here in Ukraine. And if you use the same analogy, it was great industrial policy from the South Koreans with huge U.S. support in this case in the rebuilding of South Korea is a great analogy. Related to the specifics of Ukraine, I think Ukraine has far more potential than Brazil would going forward. Whether it's the educational abilities of its population, its agricultural strength, its commodity strength, its position within the geopolitical sphere of in between a Europe and then a defeated Russia, the need of strengthened Ukraine is very similar to in the 50s when we needed to strengthen South Korea. And so I see the vibrancy of many potential industries, but it's on the backbone of having a strong educated society. It's on the backbone of a society that is willing to sacrifice, and we're witnessing this sacrifice every day in the news related to the war. And we see it every day in terms of the opportunities that can be created. Let me be clear, in working with the leadership of Ukraine, we are seeing the fortitude of the leaders, with Rostyslav and his entire team, of how to making sure that Ukraine is going to be a great destination for international capital, and that destination is going to be that is going to be long-standing, and the opportunities we have as global investors is going to be secure, and it will be proven to be a great placement for investing in the future. And so these are the foundations of what we see. I would just say at BlackRock, we are seeing firsthand the fortitude, the energy, but a really fantastic level of educated people trying to rebuild its future, making sure its future is strong. And I do believe the outpouring from international investors alongside public money will be there. And the opportunity is going to be great for those investors who are willing to take the time to learn about Ukraine and the opportunities at hand in Ukraine. Let's be clear, South Korea, on the other hand, was very much of a closed society, but and the beauty in our conversations related to Ukraine, our conversations about it's going to be a very open economy, and it's going to be a willing attractiveness of foreign capital, and with companies to come and invest and build their enterprises within Ukraine. Technology companies building their tech centers within Ukraine. This is going to be a great opportunity for many organizations and many individual investors to come in.
Right. Well, thank you, Larry. I think many people here appreciate your comments and you joining us. It is an indication of the openness with which this economic policy making is proceeding. And I know that Philip Hildebrand, your colleague, was in Kyiv a little while ago. I'm sure many people here look forward to welcome you to Kyiv as well, maybe with other people from the international financial community too. I'd like to ask you, Rostislav, to react to this vision of South Korea and to ask whether you think there is enough political consensus around the need to implement, say, the anti-corruption laws, the legal transparency that people like Larry want to see, whether you think it can actually happen or not. And then I'm going to ask Dominique Strauss-Kahn to comment on how he sees Ukraine from the perspective of somebody who, of course, used to run the IMF.
Okay. So maybe let's start with the South Korea/Brazil comparison. So maybe it was the too short explanation, but the vision of the Ukrainian government is definitely South Korea-like model. Moreover, I tell you, we are studying very carefully the whole experience, the whole industries, the whole value chains of the South Korea as a very good pro forma for the Ukrainian industrial policy. But what is really important is the very careful surgical industrial policy to build up these value chains in Ukraine. Because I don't have any doubts that the lithium mines in Ukraine will have a huge demand and a huge queue of investors at some moment of time. But there are some concerns whether we will have the same list of investors for the refineries of lithium, for the cells factories, anode, cathodes, and others, for the battery factories, for the EV manufacturing. And the difference between, very simple difference between Brazil and South Korea is that Brazil is exporting the spodumene, the lithium concentrate, and the South Korea is producing the EVs. And this is the same in everything. In iron ore, Brazil is the biggest supplier of iron ore. Korea is one of the biggest producer of the steel and steel products. If you take titanium, the same. If you take graphite, the same. If you take fertilizers, the same. If you take food, the same. And the whole story of the Ukrainian economical industrial policy is about building this value-added industrial chains. And obviously, if you mixed it up with all the intellectual story, with all the innovative industries, this is what we plan to build. But this challenge, and we see very clearly with our partners, because if you want to bring the capital to the second, third phase of the industrial production, it's not as easy as bring the capital to the crops, to the mining, to the largest production, to the raw materials. And sometimes this is about the trade policy that can a little bit produce the tensions with your main trade partners. So the open markets for our goods, value-added goods, with some light protectionism to do the barriers for the export of the raw materials to get the conversion is absolutely crucial and will be a big challenge in our negotiations with our partners in the near future.
Just very quickly, before I turn to Monsieur Strauss-Kahn, are you disappointed that the European Union has not been as supportive on the trade front as you might have hoped?
It's too early to say, but if you say look at the trade policy, we now see the issues with the grain. We are not speaking not about the value-added products. So we expect there will be very tough negotiations for the value-added and agri-products for everything. So it won't be an easy way.
Well, trade is generating tough negotiations on every front at the moment. But Monsieur Strauss-Kahn, as someone who obviously looked at the question of structural reform, how to rebuild countries in deep debt in the past, how do you evaluate what you've heard in terms of Ukraine's potential and its future?
Well, I think a lot have been said, and I must say I agree with most of what has been said. When you look at the economic consequences from the war, one of the main things comes to your mind immediately is certainly the change in energy supply, but also the change in food supply. And I think this is very important for the future because it has created a situation where tens of millions of people are close to starvation, and finally the casualties from this situation may be higher than the direct causality from the war. So it's clear for me that the question which has been put on the blackboard, supporting the Ukraine is the best you can do for the global economy, is certainly true. Because for a very simple reason, which is that the global economy requires stability, and war is exactly the contrary of stability. You have at least two channels for instability to destroy growth. The one is the real channel with limiting investment, has been said before. The second is a more financial one, creating a situation where you may have violent move on the markets. Again, it's again growth. It's very interesting to see that the IMF has an index of uncertainty, which is built months after months. And these days, the level of uncertainty is the higher ever been in the last 3 decades, much bigger than the uncertainty which appears during the pandemic, which clearly shows the influence that the war has on stability and on growth. On the contrary, supporting Ukraine is a very important thing to restore this growth. It can be done in several ways. One point I would like to underline has been already quoted by Niall, which is that we cannot afford to lose. We cannot afford to lose because the spillover, some are talking to the Baltics, some others are more insisting on Taiwan, whatever it is, the spillover will be huge, and then the consequences on the global economy will be just impossible to manage. Something which has not been mentioned, may seem a little odd, is that supporting Ukraine is also putting in place the sanctions. And the sanctions, surprisingly enough, in terms of energy, for instance, has shown that the shift from Russian energy has proved very useful for some emerging countries, namely African oil exporters. So the question could be put in another way: what if we don't support Ukraine? And in this case, besides the very bad message for other parts of the world which are under threat, we will experience a total change in globalization. It has also been said a few minutes ago, globalization relies on confidence and the rule of law, and victory of the Russians in this situation would mean exactly the contrary. So the whole globalization process will be at threat. Let me end with a very quick remark, which is that I certainly agree that supporting Ukraine is the best thing you can do for the global economy. My question is, or my point is, supporting the global economy is the best thing you can do for Ukraine. Not only because the war needs resources for weaponry or things like this, but also because we need the support of a large part of the population in our Western democracy. And this support may vanish if the global economy doesn't go well. So supporting the global economy is a very important thing to be able to go on, which goes to other questions I'm not going to elaborate on monetary policy and so on. But we have to take care that the fighting, for instance, against inflation today is a very important thing. But if President Zelensky is right, and I think he is, in saying that this was one of the main hardship in human history, then 2 or 3 points of inflation are not that too much to be paid. And I think that we have to look very cautiously to the tightening of the monetary policy that we're experiencing now, looking at the fact that we need global growth, just not only for the growth, as I said before, but also for the political support that we need in European countries and the United States.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed. We are almost out of time. Maybe I can just have one very last quick 30-second comment from each of you, but literally 30 seconds. Niall, you first.
Just dream. Because in 1973, Ukraine was twice as rich as South Korea on a per capita GDP basis. In 1991, they were basically the same. Today, South Korean per capita GDP is 4 times larger. The thing about economic history is that there are big shifts that happen. And the Wirtschaftswunder is not exclusive to West Germany. There have been economic miracles all over the world in the past 100 years, and Ukraine can be the next one.
Rostyslav, you're about